These headlines are meant to piss you off. But in this podcast, I'm going to do a piece by piece breakdown and explain how much truth there really is, or are you just shit out of luck? So is the American dream really dead, and are investors to blame for the shortage of housing inventory in the United States? Well, depends if you are a real estate investor or if you are a home buyer that already owns a home, is trying to upgrade, or if you're somebody that's renting and is trying to buy their first home, and that will determine how you look at it. So there's always a pro and a con to every single headline. But please remember, whenever you read these headlines, like 1 in 3 homes in US are being bought by the investors, all of these headlines are done to do one simple thing, and that is grab your attention, to make you feel like you're being left out. Whether when the market is bad, you're feeling left out, or you're feeling scared, because fear and high amount of anxiety is what makes you read, it what creates clickbait, and that is what makes you take action. If the headline was, oh my God, everything is great, and there's a great opportunity for all of us, you're not going to click on this. Headlines that get the most amount of reactions are headlines that are going to make you emotional, whether in a fear of loss or fear of gain. One of those two things make you react. So when we look at this issue, there are some pros and there are some cons, and we're going to discuss both of them. And this is my view in terms of where I started and where I am today in terms of my investing and what I see going on in the US market. So let's first understand what is an investor and exactly who is buying up these homes. So when we look at all the investors, a lot of times people will think about an investor as somebody who is ultra rich, somebody who's very wealthy in a big yacht or a private airplane, and they're buying up all these properties, or somebody sitting on Wall Street. Well, what is the reality? Well, companies like Blackstone or High Point or some of these big hedge funds that exist in the market, do they own a significant amount of homes? Yes, if you look at the individual numbers, 50, 60, 100, 200,000 houses that these big hedge funds own. But when we look at the entire inventory of single family and properties that are 2-unit to 4-unit properties, anything less than a property that is not a true multifamily property, what is the inventory of homes that are owned by big, large institutions? Well, the number is somewhere around 2 to 3%, which is relatively a small number compared to the rest of the volume of homes. So who owns most properties in the United States? Well, it's individual real estate investors, meaning mom and pops that own 1 to 3 properties on an average. So think about it. If you are a mom and pop, or if you're somebody that is trying to get started, you have a couple of different options. If you have a W-2 job, you may have a 401k that is offered by your company, and you may aggressively invest there, or you may be capped by the particular company that may match the amount of money you can invest in your 401k. But in most cases, it's going to be capped, and you're doing that for your long-term retirement. Or you may be somebody who's younger, or you may be somebody who's more adventurous. Say, I'm going to buy cryptocurrency, I'm going to buy gold, I'm going to buy silver, I'm going to trade currencies, or I'm going to do other things for my retirement. So there are other people in the marketplace that have realized that another place to invest is real estate, because real estate can give you a lot of advantages. Not only advantages in terms of taxes, meaning tax savings, but also advantages like leverage and advantages like appreciation. So there's a segment of our population today that chooses to invest in real estate. Now the question becomes is that taking away from you or I or somebody who's trying to get into the real estate market or trying to buy their first home? Partially, that is a competition that these investors are creating. On the other hand, a lot of these investors are cleaning up a lot of the inventory that exists. So first, let's understand where did this trend really pick up momentum. So we're all aware of what happened in 2006 through 2008, depending on what part of the country you live in. During 2006, this is just pre-crash, about 22% of all inventory in the United States that was selling hands was being bought by individual real estate investors, somebody buying their second home or third home, and most of these were properties that was not a home for them to live in. This was an investment property. So just as people have participated more and more over the years in the stock market, or today they're participating in cryptocurrency, people were buying houses that they thought they could rent out and they could go ahead and pay these down. So it's basically another form of a forced savings plan. Now, some people who are the opponents of this will say, well, but Andrew, isn't that competing with the first-time home buyer inventory? Is that competing in some cases with the first-time home buyer inventory? Of course it does compete with the first-time home buyer inventory, but then is that wrong for them to try to save money for their long-term future? See, when we look at it as a big conglomerate, as a big company, international company that is coming in and buying hundreds and thousands of houses, then people may say, well, they have an unfair advantage. But yet, should they be able to own thousands and thousands worth of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stocks, if not billions worth of stocks, or invest in crypto or with gold or trade currencies? Is that right? Then why is it's right or wrong in terms of the housing market? This is something to think about. Yet, that's not the majority of the players in the housing inventory. Majority of the players are mom and pops that own anywhere from 1 to 3 properties, and they're buying these properties as a forced retirement plans. A lot of people that are investing in real estate, they'll invest in real estate with a strategy which is 20% down, and they've saved that particular money, and now they're trying to put it to use. So over time, that the property will appreciate. They're going to take a depreciation against the property as well, because that's something the IRS allows. That becomes a rental home for somebody like you. Or when I started, I rented some of those houses because that is all at the time I could afford or I thought I could afford was a rental home. So is that bad? Is that good? Well, it depends. If you're somebody that looks at it that, oh my God, the opportunity is not available to me, then you're going to look at it as something bad. But then a lot of people, America is becoming a renter nation, meaning today we have more renters. Now, some people will say, Andrew, we have more renters because most people cannot afford to buy a home. But if we look at the numbers and if we look at reality, today, more than ever in history, if we look at the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it was harder to buy homes at that time than it is today. So what do I mean? Well, what I mean by that is the amount of programs or the types of programs that were available at that time in terms of financing for a first-time buyer. Today, we have more innovative programs that are available in the marketplace than they have ever been in history. Also, on the other side, today, it's easier to buy a rental home with something called a DSCR loan, which is based on your rental only. So actually, it's easier for you to buy a rental property that you rent out rather than buy your own home. Because if you're buying your own home, unfortunately, they're going to ask you for a W-2, they're going to ask you for a 1099, and if you don't have a reliable 1099, meaning 2 years worth of returns that can be proven through bank accounts and where you have filed 1099 taxes, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you as a homeowner to be able to buy a house. Now, who's to blame for that? Is the investors that are to blame for that? Or is it the Congress and the lawmakers are to blame for that? I'm going to take the side that it's much more the lawmakers that are to blame for that, because it is harder. The way the Fannie and Freddie programs work, which are the loans that are provided to homeowners, they are tougher to get than for an investor to be able to buy the property. So a lot of times people will say, so Andrew, there are hundreds and thousands of homes that are being bought. So what do the numbers say? Well, pre-2006, which is prior to the crash, it was about 22% of all homes were being bought by investors. In 2013, that number went up to about 24%. By 2020, that number was down to about 18% of all homes that were sold in the United States. And during the pandemic, it peaked at almost 30% of all properties that were being bought were investor-owned sales. Today, if we look at it, the averages are somewhere around 22 to 25 to 26%, depending on what part of the country you live in. So does that mean that investors are killing the American dream? Well, I would beg to differ. I feel today that with the amount of loan programs that are available, there are more loan programs that are available for a homeowner to buy a home than there had ever been in history. Is it easier for an investor to buy a home today for investment than ever in history? Absolutely. But is it the fault, or should the investors be blamed for that? From my perspective, the opportunity for anybody in America to be able to buy an investment property is equal. Now, you're going to say, but Andrew, I don't have money. I don't have the perfect credit score. I don't have a lot of resources. See, for most people that are investors, they didn't have the money always. They didn't have the perfect credit score, but they looked at it as a vehicle to be able to help them to build wealth. So some of the things that are always said is, well, because of the investors, homeowners cannot buy properties. So what are you supposed to do? And this is something that people have to think about rather than reacting to it and say, well, the investor should not be allowed to buy any houses. So you should not be allowed to own more than a certain amount of stocks. You should not be allowed to hold more than a certain amount of gold. Should you not be allowed to buy more than a certain amount of cryptocurrency? Now, that may be an argument from some people that, hey, this is housing. This is something, a basic need for a human being, so investors should not be allowed to do that. Yet, the only reason why investors are able to step into the market is twofold. Number one, a lot of the housing that is being bought by investors is distressed housing. Meaning in 2008, 2009, 10, 11, and 12, when I started, at that time, there was an opportunity for someone like me to go to a bank, borrow a second loan on my own home, and take that little bit of money and invest it into a foreclosure home. A foreclosure home was a property that an average homeowner was not either unwilling to buy and or did not have the ability to go and buy and invest in that property. In most cases, people have to go buy that asset, which needs a lot of plumbing work, electrical work. It needs a lot of rehab to be able to, again, put it back into a condition where a first-time home buyer will buy that property. Now, was the opportunity equal? I will say the opportunity is 100% equal. But does the average person decide to take advantage of that opportunity? That is a completely separate issue. In most cases, most people are not going to take the time to go buy a property that is heavily distressed and then go fix up the property and then go refinance it and go through the amount of stress that it takes and the amount of time that is required to be able to buy a home. For me, my first home, which happened to be a townhome because at the time that's all I could afford, was bought back in 2007. And I bought it as a distressed asset, and I did what is called a 203K loan on it, which is a loan for first-time home buyers that you can do, and that is a product that is available today. In fact, it's one of the great products a lot of people are unaware of. So that property I bought as a foreclosure property for about $210,000, fixed that particular property for about $40,000. And once it was rehabbed, now the appraised value of that property was almost $330,000 or $340,000 back then. And that vehicle is available to any single American that chooses to be able to use it. Unfortunately, a lot of times either people are unaware of that existing in the marketplace or They just feel they cannot qualify for any different reasons. Now, a lot of times people feel that they're priced out of the market because if you live in a place like California, if you live in certain parts of the country where the pricing is extremely high, people will say, well, I cannot buy properties. And they may be 100% right, even for me. At the time when I started, in the more expensive parts of Chicago, I could not afford to be able to purchase a home. I had to buy a home at the time where it was affordable for what I could pay for at the time. So some people may say, well, it's not fair that you should be able to buy a property in downtown Chicago in the cool part of town. And other people like me will adjust and accommodate to be kind of in the suburbs in a place where it is more affordable housing at the time for me. So depending on where you are on the camp, you may look at the issue as positive or negative. A lot of times, often people feel, well, a lot of investors are coming in with all cash and they're buying properties, and hence I get priced out. So if somebody is buying a property, the average investor that buys a property for cash is not somebody that is 20, 25, 30 years old. The average investor that buys a property for cash is somebody that is going to be well into their 50s, if not into their 60s. If you look at the average profile of a millionaire in America, the average profile of a millionaire is 57 and up in America. So what that means is that this person, in most cases, has saved money for an extended period of time and probably invested either in the stock market or invested in some other business or somewhere where they have the kind of money that they can take that and buy a home free and clear. Now, some people will say, well, that's not fair. Well, if it's not fair, life is not fair. Because my take on that is that if this person has saved their money for a period of time and today they're able to buy a property for cash, then that is something that they should have the ability to do, because once they buy the property, they're going to provide a rental property for a person to live in. Now, some people may say, well, that's bad, but I'll say that's good because you're providing housing and you're not taking away somebody's American dream. You're providing housing to a family that, for whatever reason, either chooses to rent or chooses not to buy a home. And either case, it is okay. The other issue is that a lot of times people feel that it inflates the prices by investors coming in. Well, if you look at 2008 through 2012, there was not as many home buyers, so that gave investors the ability to go and stabilize the market by buying properties that were distressed assets, by fixing them up, and then being able to put that back on either the rental roll or being able to resell the properties where a new homeowner had a beautiful home to live in. I think a lot of times when people feel that they're disenfranchised in some way, a lot of it is because, oh my God, these investors are coming in, buying these houses, and they just slap them together, and then homeowners have to buy these houses, and they make this extraordinary profit. Guys, a lot of times this feeling that somebody else is making an extraordinary amount of profit is what turns some people off. Do we make individually a large profit on some properties? Absolutely we do. It's a business. But yet on other properties, you're doing a lot of work to improve the property. You have to do it by the code, you have to do it by the standards. And so this idea that fictitiously you're buying a property, somehow slapping it together and making hundreds of thousands of dollars, that is not the reality. Business doesn't work that way generally, and there's a supply and demand issue that kicks into play. That as there is a large amount of supply, and if there is not enough demand, the pricing of housing is going to come down. But if there is a low amount of supply and there is a sharp demand, which is what we saw happen after the pandemic, housing prices go up. So this feeling that a lot of times the real estate investors control the pricing on a property absolutely makes no sense. All a real estate investor does is they're taking advantage and they're trying to participate in the market just like you would. If you're somebody that goes out and buys a car that has been in an accident and then buys all the parts, fixes it because you happen to be a mechanic and good at putting the car back together. Should you make a 15 or 20% profit on the investment that you put into the car and resell the car so somebody else can enjoy it? And what if you decided, well, you're going to just use the car for Uber? Or what if you decide you're going to put the car on Turo? Is that wrong? And that's where the basic crux of the matter is, that whether an investor decides to buy the property, rehab the property, resell it for a profit, or whether the investor buys the property and rents the property out, he or she is not taking away from you as your American dream, because you have an equal opportunity as a homeowner. If you have today, if you look at somebody that is a veteran, you can buy properties with 0% down. If you're a first-time home buyer, you can buy properties with 3.5% down. You can buy properties, in fact, today, as a first-time home buyer with a 0% down and a 5% credit back from the seller, where you can literally get into the property for a couple $1,000 out of pocket. Opportunity is equal. But the question is, do you know how to take advantage of the opportunity? Some people that are investors like me, we will always look at the positives of the market as to what is possible, because that's how we see the world. There are other people that, despite all the facts that are available, they're always going to see that they lack something because somebody else is taking that opportunity away. Yet, the opportunity that is available is the same for all of us. Henry Ford once said, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. And in both cases, you are right. So my question to you is, who are you? Are you that person that says, oh my God, I can't participate? And the way to look at it from my perspective would be, you may not be able to participate yet. That doesn't mean you can't participate, period. Because there are so many strategies today that are available that were not available at one time. Something like house hacking a property, something where you're renting part of the property out and you live in the other part of the property that helps you offset the rents. Now, is that possible in every market? Is that possible in every case? No, it's not. Yet, it's going to require an individual sacrifice from all of us. Today, we live in a society where we want to live a lifestyle, where we want to live a quote-unquote a quality of life, where people live a life which is a lot more about experiences. So they're taking their hard-earned dollars and they're spending it in places where in the past, if you look at 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, that money was not going to that, be it a cell phone, be it getting a cup of coffee, which costs $5 or $6. And some people might say, well, Andrew, you're saying I can't go to Starbucks and buy a $5 or $6 worth of coffee. That's not what I'm saying. It's up to you where you choose to spend your money. Yet, if we just roll the clock back about 20 to 25 years ago, most Americans were not going out to eat every single day of the week. Most Americans were not going out and consuming a cup of coffee that at some point may cost 10 cents to 25 cents or maybe $1. Today, we are used to living an experiential lifestyle. Hence, the amount of money that we spend as a society on experiences is a lot larger than what was done if we look at the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the 2000s. And yet, today people feel that they have lost the American dream. The American dream is alive and it is kicking. The question is, are you willing to pay the price? Are you willing to sacrifice on some part of your life to be able to achieve your American dream? Not only the American dream, but the dream of being able to invest in the housing market is alive, and the number of investors today that are buying properties that proves it, that it is available. The question is, do you know how to invest? Do you know how you too can take advantage of the opportunity? And the best part about that is it's easier today to buy an investment property because of the loans that are available in the marketplace than it is to even buy a home to live in. Having said that, if you'd like to learn more, go to andrewholmesrealestate.com. We do free events and free seminars. The best part about that is you never have to feel that you're being left out because you have an opportunity. The question is, are you willing to pay the price? Thank you. Have a good day.